Welcome to Crafty Sourcer. If you're looking for a raw, unfiltered podcast on all things sourcing in APAC, you've come to the right place. Grab a coffee or wine and join your host and other guests as we dive deep into the complex and ever-evolving world of sourcing, keeping you informed on insights, tools, and even at times, a healthy sourcing debate or two. Now, here's your host, Denise Pereira from Kaleidosource. Settle in and let's get crafty.
Hi, everyone. My name is Denise, and I'm super excited to be here for two main reasons. First of all, this is our first ever episode for Crafty Sourcer, where we bring you all things sourcing related with some phenomenal individuals doing some fantastic things within sourcing, specifically in APAC. And number two, we have none other than one of the real OGs of sourcing within Australia, someone I respect and admire, Martin Freeman. Martin, thank you so much for, first of all, saying yes to being the first ever guest on Crafty Sourcer. But, just being here. So thank you so much, Martin.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Denise, for inviting me. I'm very kind of feel proud and privileged that you actually asked me to be part of your podcast and first one up. So hopefully I won't ruin it for you. But thank you very much. Yeah.
No, appreciate it. Martin, you and I have been in touch for like several years, on and off. We've chatted on LinkedIn. In fact, you were one of the first people I'd even introduced in one of our sourcing jams at Zendesk, if you remember. And the team took so much away from that. So, I'm glad that we've been connected for so many years. Now, as we know, sourcing has evolved, drastically over the years. So before we kind of get into all things sourcing, we did a bit of a teaser. And I had quite a lot of people, reach out to me saying, who is this person? I'd like to know more about them. So let's very quickly get into an intro on who is Martin, and then kind of talk to us about, how did you fall in love with sourcing? What was it about sourcing that really, kind of nailed it for you?
Yeah, thank you once again. So apologies that people didn't quite know me. I'm pretty much under the radar in terms of in Australia. But a little bit about myself. My name's Martin Freeman, originally from the UK. I have roughly about 25 years of sourcing experience, mostly in-house since about 2006, but come from an agency background originally. It's the typical old cliche that I fell into recruiting, and it really was like that. I mean, I've had one or two career changes. But when I left school and uni, etc., I wanted to be a civil engineer, design bridges and roads, etc. But then there was a big crash in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. So I needed to kind of find a different career. So I went into finance and I joined a recruitment company within their finance team. And one thing led to another. I got asked how I'd feel about kind of working in recruitment. I didn't really see myself as a natural salesperson as such. So I found sourcing, and since really about 1997, that's been my kind of swim lane, really. So
yeah, interesting. How was sourcing back then? I mean, compared to now in 2023.
It was crazy. Yeah, I mean, like the evolutions of sourcing since then to now is just like mind-boggling. I mean, when I first started out, there was like paper CVs, fax machines, and you used to kind of send CVs across to hiring managers. But since the kind of early 2000s, we had like the job boards, and then kind of LinkedIn came along. And I think it's just expanded more and more ever since. And I think that the biggest thing more recently is kind of the evolution of kind of AI technologies, in the inverted kind of commas, etc. So I think like a lot of people kind of moved out into more the community side of things. So a sourcer's job is definitely not easy. You've got to know where the talent is and find the best ways to try and engage with that individual, really. So I think that's really where the challenge lies these days.
Yeah. Excellent. And I think one thing, like I personally really do enjoy sometimes picking up the phone, and I know a lot of people don't enjoy that. And I know it's a very traditional method, but I also think it's something that can bear a lot of fruit if it's something we enjoy doing, at times as well. And Martin, obviously you've been in the game for such a long time. You've seen, the traditional methodologies, they work, they don't work in certain instances. Like, what is sourcing to you, and what is the value that it can bring? You've obviously seen it in so many different companies. You've been at Cisco, you've been at Expedia, now you're at Okta. So you've obviously seen it in massive, complex environments. So what do you think, or how do you see sourcing can bring so much value into any level of organizations, no matter what the complexity is?
Yeah, I think first of all, you've got to kind of define what sourcing is really. I think, and it's not a one size fits all, and it really is dependent on the model within the organization. But in terms of the sources role, it's primarily the identification, the engagement, and conversion of that person for the organization. And a sourcer can be one or all three of those things. But then kind of outside of that, there's going to be things that we kind of collect along the way, like lots of market intelligence, or if the company's looking to go into a new marketplace, like what does that talent landscape look like? And I think this is kind of stuff that a sourcer does kind of bring to the table quite well, because we are very kind of data driven, and we're able to kind of bring that information to the table to kind of drive a conversation.
Absolutely.
But then things outside of that, I've seen a lot of sources that I've worked with in the past do lots of kind of programmatic things around HR, etc.
Yeah.
I've just kind of decided to kind of stick in the sourcing swim lane. So there is definitely a lot of skills around the sources that can be utilized in other parts of the organization.
Awesome. And let's talk about from a complexity side of things, like when you look at places like where you're in Okta or wherever you've actually embedded a function like that, how complex can it be?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's just like, let's take a step back. When I joined Expedia, for instance, they didn't have a sourcing function. So they had roughly about 80 to 90 recruiters, all various levels of sourcing capability, but they didn't really have someone that was where sourcing was their kind of key strength.
Right.
So I worked with a gentleman who's kind of ex-Google, ex-Bill Gates Foundation. His name is Tito Magabe. He's actually left recruiting now, unfortunately. But he asked me to come on board for Expedia and really just kind of showcase like what can a sourcer do to the organization.
Yep.
Typically I was brought on, and they literally just gave me the 10 hardest positions that they had. And the first conversation on day 3 I had was with the CFO of Expedia, and he was just adamant that you just couldn't fill this kind of role internally. And I just really wanted to kind of show him, that we could. And I just kind of went at it for solidly for 2 weeks or something like that. And kind of brought back some reports and showed him who we reached out to and who was interested and who wasn't. And he couldn't believe that TA functions could gather that intelligence and kind of bring it back in a digestible way that he could understand. Ultimately I got one hire, and we hired the silver medalist 12 months later. And I think it just kind of stemmed from there, really. We started bringing on further and further sort of more and more resources into the organization. We made it more global. At the time, I was a contractor there, so I wasn't in that kind of leadership role at the moment. So I knew someone that could kind of step into that role. But then she eventually moved, and then I kind of took over and converted with Expedia, and we kind of started to expand the model. And we were eventually the number one channel in terms of time to fill, cost reduction, and all that kind of stuff. So these are the things when you kind of translate that all into kind of dollars and time is what echoes with the business model. Yeah.
And I think that's a really great example, Martin. And I think one thing I'm a big believer in is that sourcing is a long-term game for long-term gain, right? Because it's not just about the hire now. Like you said, there was a silver medalist that you'll hire 12 months later. This is how it all sort of pans out. And there's no quick wins here. Not all the time. If it happens, it happens, but it's not always going to happen, right? So
it can't happen overnight.
No.
It's kind of, you can work on the now positions and hopefully it gets done, but you've got to think about what you're going to be filling in the future. So, I mean, I've always been a big fan of, aligning sourcing teams to kind of core and common positions or ones that No, we're going to hire now, but we're also going to be hiring in 6 to 12 months' time.
Absolutely.
At the same time, working on those niche positions, so people don't kind of get bored in their roles, just working on the same old every day.
Yeah.
But they can have a bit of a varied diet at the same time.
Yeah. Awesome. And Martin, obviously with what you've set up in your career, is there an example of maybe a sourcing strategy that you've done or set up that was particularly innovative or successful within an organization that you've worked in?
Yeah, again, apologies if I keep on harping back to Expedia, but
please go for it.
That was really good because, as I say, there's a lot of stuff that I was able to kind of influence directly, whereas I've worked at startups since, etc. But in terms of Expedia, I kind of had different individuals that were really good at certain things within sourcing. The one thing that I wasn't really an expert in, but I had a really great guy called Adam Hall, who's ex-VMware. He's based in the US, and he did a lot of kind of program sourcing stuff. So I'll try and break it down very quickly, but we were hiring lots of software engineers in Seattle, and we were able to kind of section off a big chunk of headcount. So stuff that wasn't going to go out to the recruitment team. And he was able to kind of work on big campaigns, working very closely with our kind of marketing teams, driving leads through via Marketo. And essentially what it broke down is that he had to reach out to roughly about 500 to 600 people in about a 2-week period. And during week 3, he had to get all the kind of pre-technical testing done for about 40 candidates. On the 40 candidates that were kind of going to be offered to come on site, we knew that we were going to have like on-site event, and from that 20 to 30 people that turn up, we would make about 10 to 15 hires from
Amazing.
that. And it was just he would do this on a quarterly basis. He wouldn't work on day-to-day requisitions.
Yeah.
He would just kind of take a chunk of headcount, leave it with me. I'm going to kind of work with the business. We're going to set up an event. And he was highly successful at doing that. And I think that's something that sourcing teams can do more of, rather than those just kind of one-off positions time and time again.
And I think this also leads to, if your business has good workforce planning in place, it can absolutely lead to some really good achievable outcomes, especially if you know what you're going to be hiring for in the next 6-12 months, especially if they're recurring roles as well. That gives you a lot more leeway into going ahead of time than waiting for the last minute or 2 weeks before a rec is actually going to go live.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I know that sources had to kind of dive in when there's fires burning and all that stuff, but the ideal situation is that if you know that there's going to be a chunk of headcount coming up in 3 months, align it to a sourcing team, and they can kind of get ahead of the game as quick as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where we see companies make this mistake, is they'll do everything straight up, where they'll do the recruitment efforts, they'll sometimes even engage with agencies, and then the sourcing team is sometimes the last avenue after they've exhausted every other channel possible, and then it's given to sourcing, whereas you should be engaging with sourcing from the get-go, along with your recruitment efforts, whether that's job posting, internal referral programs, or whatever that may be, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that the earliest that we can get in there, the better. And it's not to say that, recruiters shouldn't stop sourcing, or they shouldn't utilize referrals or direct applications. I'll probably draw a line when they kind of start saying, look, let's engage an agency, because that doesn't kind of make sense that you got, a sourcer doing outbound and an agency outbound. Nothing against what they're trying to do, but it just means that we should just focus elsewhere. So.
Exactly. And in terms of, let's talk about, and I love asking this question because I think it really does show how sourcing does stand out in terms of, how it can be done and how you can actually yield some fantastic results. Is there a case study or something that you've done where you've sort of used a non-traditional sourcing method, and that's really turned into something that you weren't expecting, like an outcome in terms of whether that's a hire or whether it's just been something else?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I can probably point to, really. So, and it's still kind of pertinent to how we source today, really. But going back to the mid kind of 2000s, say 2008, 2009, when I really started to introduce some advanced sourcing techniques into my day-to-day. I was working at Betfair at the time, and he asked me to find an Oracle database specialist, database security specialist, should I say? And like at the time, there was only like the traditional job boards, and I wasn't really finding that level of candidate on those sites really. So I kind of went to Oracle website, and I was kind of peeling back on some documents they had, and one thing led to another. Anyway, I found an instructional designer that was putting together technical content for database security. And I just kind of found his details on LinkedIn, and I kind of reached out to him, and he actually put me in touch with a database security specialist. And like, he didn't know that guy was actively looking for a job, but we had an initial conversation. I told him about what we were doing with Betfair, and that actually led to an offer and hire for that database specialist. And and those kind of cross-referencing skills, like taking a look at information from one site, referencing it against another site, doing your engagement piece, is still, it's still kind of active today compared to, say 15 years ago. That part hasn't really changed that massively. There's other things that I've done as well. I think the one thing I did at Expedia pretty well, and nearly lost my job over it, I could have done, was, I kind of tried to put myself in the recruiter's shoes a little bit, in terms of, they're not going to be actively sourcing on Google and GitHub and all these kind of places. So what I try to do is kind of aggregate that information and put that into LinkedIn Recruiter, so that they could just kind of filter on what channel that they wanted to search in. So, what I was doing, I was kind of collecting like thousands of people's information from GitHub, from our ATS, from Google. I was uploading those email addresses into LinkedIn Recruiter as a project, and then kind of let LinkedIn kind of find those profiles with their own system. Then I kind of put them into kind of project files. So we were looking for we were hiring kind of Java developers in places like Seattle, England, and India. So all that the recruiter had to do was literally just kind of put a keyword in the search bar, search on location, and it would just have a pre-populated list of names and contact information that they could just reach out to straight away.
That's amazing.
I think I had about 600,000 names and about 1 million pieces of contact information there.
And this was all in the system?
All in LinkedIn, yeah.
All in LinkedIn, wow. Yeah.
That I kind of uploaded from all these various channels. So, the reason why I mentioned I could have lost my job is that there's potentially a big data privacy going on there. But we were migrating from, I can't remember the system we had at the time, but we were moving over to Workday, and I was going to get rid of
glorious Workday.
All this kind of contact information. I just didn't want to see it go to waste. So I kind of exported it out, and I think I had about 400,000 email addresses and contact information just sitting there, and I was thinking the security team are going to walk me off site any moment, but they didn't, and it worked out pretty well. Yeah.
And that's the thing about sourcing, is it's about leaving no stone unturned, right? Like when you were talking about cross-referencing, that in itself takes a lot of time. When you're cross-referencing from one platform to another, into an ATS, into another system, you're trying to find all these various sort of data points to just make sure that that one person is the right person that we're reaching out to.
It is. I mean, it sounds like a lot. Like when you kind of describe it like that to a recruiter, you kind of think, oh Christ, I'm going to have to click on 10 to 15 things to go and find. I'm not going to do that. But when you actually do it and you master it, etc., it doesn't take that long.
No.
I mean, it's 5 to 10, 5 clicks extra, and it could be like that, that golden nugget. So say if you can master that a little bit, when I kind of do some of my sessions with recruiters, I kind of give them 3 or 4 things to kind of take away and master, rather than giving them the whole Pandora's box where they're just going to get mind blown. It's just not worth it.
Yeah. And with the, what do you think are some sort of common misconceptions about sourcing? Because there are quite a few out there. I mean, if I look at when I started my job search mid this year, after my role was made redundant, there's a lot of misconceptions about what sourcing is. So what are some that you've come across, and how do you think is the best way to tackle some of those misconceptions that you've seen, Martin?
Yeah, I think, look, I think the common one is probably people think it's a bit of a step beneath recruiting, right? So, and I've had this kind of conversation with many leaders and even within the sourcing, or sourcing community itself. But it shouldn't really be seen as a step down. It should be seen as a different muscle within TA.
Absolutely.
And recruiters should see sources as a valuable partner in the process. It's not that we're trying to do anything above them. We're trying to work in collaboration. We just have that kind of extra muscle in terms of being able to dedicate a bit more time to the search and uncover all those kind of loose stones and try and find those low-hanging fruits, etc., and kind of bring that to the table. But I think sometimes with recruiters, etc., they may have eyes on different roles and different positions, and they kind of think, well, if I go into sourcing or if I, get labeled as a sourcer, where do I go? And that's kind of a valid thing at the same time. But I think at the same, I think at the very bare minimum, the industry has to kind of see sourcing as like a different muscle to TA and not a subservient kind of person to the recruitment process.
Yeah, awesome. I fully agree with that, because I was running into the same sort of issue when I was searching for a role as well. Was like people were struggling to differentiate what sourcing is from recruitment, and they were not realizing that I could very easily do a TA or tech recruitment role, but they were so focused on the sourcing aspect without actually understanding what sourcing does at the same time. In terms of platforms and tools, like, everybody's talking about generative AI. There's way too many tools out there now with AI. So in a sources toolkit, or even within any recruiter's toolkit for sourcing in general, to just make your life a lot more easier, what are some of the tools or platforms do you find indispensable for sourcing and should be in everybody's toolkit day in, day out?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that you could probably use. So one is getting hold of one or two data aggregate or kind of social aggregators. So I use two, which is Amazing Hiring, which is a sidebar extension, and I use Hire EZ. There are others out there, but really what you want to do is be able to kind of collect that social information, because that will kind of give in terms of where you're going to be able to go after those individuals and tailor your outbound activities, etc. So I use a couple of aggregators. I also use a lot of not a lot of, but I use some template tools. So I use one that's called Briskine, and that can work within LinkedIn. It can work within Gmail, and pretty much any website really. And instead of having to kind of create different templates for different platforms, you can just use one template, and essentially it will kind of load into each platform, etc. But from an AI perspective, there's a few that I'm using at the moment. So I use GPT writer for Gmail, and that's just where I'm like, if I'm having a bit of a foggy brain day, etc., and I just need a bit more creativity, I will, I'll compose an email, and then I'll kind of get it to kind of proofread it and make it a bit more concise or whatever it may be. So that's a ChatGPT writer for Gmail is pretty good. I also use Auto Text Expander. That works within LinkedIn and other sites as well. But the good thing about Auto Text Expander, it actually scrapes information from LinkedIn as well, and can put it into a G Sheets or an Excel spreadsheet as well. So that's pretty good. And it's got that kind of template component as well. And I'm also using Merlin, which is like a chat GPT thing. And I'm starting to use that for more connection requests. I think we're getting very close to that kind of utopian situation where you're able to kind of pull out a list of URLs from a search, and go into a tool like Phantom Buster, which is an API tool, and it will kind of start sending connection requests, and then you can actually do some campaign information in the background as well. So I think we're getting pretty close where you can do using one or two tools to be able to do all that kind of outreach at scale as well. So,
nice shout out, by the way. Those are pretty cool tools. I don't know if you've heard of Clay, Martin, by the way.
I haven't, no, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's it's been around for a while, but I've just started dabbling in clay because I've got a bit of time on my hands. But check it out, because it's used as a sales prospecting tool. But from a sourcing side, you can use it for the exact same reasons, but flip it on its side and think of it from a candidate engagement standpoint. So you can still get a lot of other data points, and you can use it as a data enrichment tool. So email, phone numbers, and all of that. So it's actually pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah, because I have higher EZ, etc. I probably get a lot of contact information.
Yes.
But I'm not like massively into mass automation for everything. I still like to kind of proofread everything and check to make sure that the message that goes out is kind of on point. Whereas if you're over reliant, pull off like a list of 50 names or 100 names or whatever it may be, and then kind of just press a button to run. I always worry about whether the message is going to be quite on point. So I like to kind of proofread a lot.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, Martin, we are coming to the end of it, but I do have one bonus question for all the listeners out there. Anyone looking to either hone into more of their sourcing artistry, or a recruiter who's looking to spend a little more time doing a lot more sourcing, like what are sort of one or two sort of suggestions or pieces of advice you'd like to give anyone listening out there?
Yeah, I think I think join one of the sourcing communities first of all. Like SourceCon's a great one. SOSU's going to be a good one, just because the people in there are very open. They're very sharing. There's no egos in there. They're happy to kind of help if you get stuck on something, or they're happy to suggest a tool that may kind of solve your problem. So I'd say certainly join there. I think as well, look, there's lots of sourcing tools out there. Don't get like massively like consumed that you have to have 100 tools out there. That's not going to make you a great sourcer overnight. I think like master 3 or 4 things, like get the kind of basics right, like understand a little bit about Boolean. There's lots of resources out there around that, because if LinkedIn were to go away tomorrow, like where would you start? So you probably need to understand a little bit about Boolean, get the fundamentals right there, and then start building the blocks around that. So, get an automation tool that's going to help you do a bit more scale. Get some sequencing tools in there as well that's going to help your productivity level. Get a few maybe kind of email contact finders as well. So I wouldn't, if you're starting from zero, start at like five to 10 tools maximum, master those, and then kind of branch out from there.
That's fantastic advice, Martin. And you're spot on with everything. Like, don't go in just for one thing that's going to do all. You got to play around with different things, and it's always great to go back to basics. So look at your Boolean operators. Go back to basics. That's going to be your best friend to start. So Martin, thank you so much for spending time and being our first guest on Crafty Sourcer.
Thank you.
Anyone who wants to connect with Martin, I'm going to drop in his LinkedIn profile into the podcast as well. So please connect with Martin. He's always open to having a chat as well. So Martin, once again, thank you so much.
No, thank you, Denise. It was a pleasure to be with you today, and like good luck for the future with the podcast as well. And
thank you.
Any questions, feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Thanks, Martin.
See
ya. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode, and we'll be back next week with another exciting episode. If you found this valuable, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Once again, happy sourcing and stay crafty. Until next time.